Hello, everyone. Welcome to 70's Inside ESG, where we meet with leaders in sustainability, climate, and the ESG space. And our guest today is Lincoln Bleveans. Hi, Lincoln. How are you?
I'm good. Very happy to be here.
Same here. We're very happy to have you. If you don't mind, I'll share a little bit about your background. Lincoln is the Executive Director of Sustainability, Utilities, and Infrastructure at Stanford University. Lincoln has spent decades at the front lines of renewable energy, clean tech, and large-scale sustainability projects. He worked with utilities, startups, and academia. And honestly, I can't wait to start this conversation and get Lincoln's unique point of view on the energy transition from boardrooms to power plants. By the way, I'm Doron, Marketing Director for 7E. We are an AI-centric generative compliance solution focusing on enterprise compliance, regulatory posture, and environmental reporting. Again, Lincoln, thanks for joining us today. To kick off our conversation, can you share a little bit about yourself and where your sustainability journey started?
Yeah, for me, it's all about making sustainability innovation real. And it's making innovation real has been really the theme of my now 30 plus year career. I started out in independent power, building privately financed power plants around the world. But from there to mergers and acquisitions, to energy service companies, to my own startup for a while that didn't survive the Arab Spring. We were focused on Tunisia and Oman, and
Wow.
that didn't work out well for us, but learned a lot. And also, as you said, in utilities. So both investor-owned utilities back on the East Coast in New York, as well as municipally owned utilities, Burbank Water and Power down in Southern California. And as you said, now at Stanford, running sustainability, but also the mission essential utilities, energy, water, waste, as well as building energy management, wildfire mitigation, resilience, emergency response, employee safety, and really having a fantastic time of it. We are really innovating here at Stanford. We are almost done with our first real climate action plan for the university, going all across the university. And also doing I want to talk about this a little bit in the podcast, doing a lot of collaboration with the academic side of the university. I'm on the operations side, on collaboration with academia on our systems here, our vertically integrated utility systems here, to create better sustainability and user experience and economic outcomes. So a whole lot going on, and it's been a wonderful ride. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
Wow. I actually love that you're saying it's that you're enjoying your job and you're enjoying what you're doing is not everyone can say that, but think a lot of people in sustainability say that. And to your point, I think the places where I failed with startups is the best education I ever got. So it's like a crash course like no other. It's I highly recommend when people ask me, I highly recommend do the startup journey at least once. For me, it's been more than a few times, and in some cases successful. But the ones you fail with it's unbelievable. Not just fulfilling, but you learn the most.
Yeah,
It does that.
yeah,
And as you said, there's many reasons for it. It can be, as you said, for the political ecosystem or the current climate or many other things that come into play, which you need to think. There's a lot of juggling going on in startups, which I actually like.
yes.
I love that. And we'll deep dive into some of the things you mentioned about utilities and about energy, and you work in the academia. That actually leads us to our first question. When people talk about the energy transition, people's attention is drawn in many cases to shiny technologies and solutions, including like solar, wind, hydrogen, batteries, but I'm not always aware of real world considerations, including efficiency level, cost, integration challenges. Lincoln, what is your perspective based on your experience, and how do you balance between innovation, as we just talked about startups, and actual integration in real world?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question. Really, three components for me. One, the first being that I think as human beings, we really enjoy the technology. We love new
Right.
stuff, but we are what I find in sustainability innovation in particular is that the human element, the human beings and behavior change and change management and all of the things that are necessary to make innovation real are really, really hard for us. And I'll give you a quick example. We moved into a house not far from Stanford a few years ago,
Right.
and it had Nest thermostats. And we had
Right.
never had Nest thermostats before. I looked at them and I saw cost savings and carbon savings and all sorts of different ways to optimize our energy experience. My wife and children looked at them and they saw a thermostat that you turned off, you turned on, you turned up, you turned down. All the wonderful technology in the device, which is a beautiful device, is
Right.
completely lost if you don't have the behavior change. And so how do we operate it? I tend to program it, and then they tend to turn it off and turn it on and move it up and move it down manually.
Yeah.
So it's the behavior change is really the other side of the coin with technology innovation. And I think we see this at even greater scale with AI, where the potential of AI, for example, in an organizational setting is even, it's about the technology, integrating the technology, but integrating the technology really drives a necessity to transform the business at the same time. So it's the human side of these. I think there are two other, one other big component here, and that is when you think about efficiency and you think about integration and costs, the one thing I think the world is not seeing yet clearly is the distinction between cost and value. And this becomes very, very important as, for example, as we get to more and more renewable energy on a grid, intermittent renewable energy like wind and solar.
Right.
The cost of that energy on a per kilowatt hour, per megawatt hour basis tends to be very, very low, but an intermittent kilowatt hour produced does not equal an intermittent, a reliable electric service of a kilowatt hour for the end user. And so we look at things like batteries. The battery is expensive. It's not a power generator. It just stores and then discharges, charges and discharges. But if we want to create a reliable electric service for the customer, for the end user, we have to bring the battery into, the battery has a tremendous cost, but it has an even bigger value in making electric service reliable in a heavy intermittent renewable context.
Right.
The world is still looking at generation, still looking at storage, for example, as from a cost perspective. And my argument is that we need to look at it from a value perspective. The value of an intermittent kilowatt hour is lower than a dispatchable kilowatt hour. The value of a battery is much more than the cost of a battery. And so, but where we get stuck is actually compensating these assets accordingly, where an incremental kilowatt hour is priced the same no matter how it's produced, how controllable it is. And batteries just don't get the revenue in most markets to make them profitable, to reflect, the value that they're bringing to the system. So as this whole just to use energy as an example, as the whole energy market shifts, I think we've really got to stop talking about cost and talk more about value, such that we actually get the assets in the system that we need to get to create reliable, affordable, sustainable electric service.
That's interesting. So would you say this is a division between short term and long term in to some extent?
I think it's short term and medium term, probably.
Okay.
The world is, some places faster than others, but
Right.
the world is actually moving very, very quickly towards power grids that are dominated by intermittent renewable generation.
Right.
And that's a great thing. That's a great thing for decarbonization. But the only way we create the right output, that reliable, affordable, sustainable electric service, is by recognizing the value and compensating the value that's being provided. So setting up mechanisms to compensate battery storage appropriately, setting up mechanisms to compensate baseload dispatchable power appropriatly. And it's so there's again, going back to the human beings, it's a real mindset shift in the way that we think about the system.
Pretty much answers that, and actually leads us to my next question, where for most companies, energy and emissions are the biggest parts of their footprint, but reporting progress doesn't always mean achieving progress. From all the projects you led over the years, what would be one step organizations can take that truly moves the needle on decarbonization?
To me, it's understanding that sustainability is just efficiency in disguise. And so even if you're not looking for a sustainability outcome, whether or not you're looking for a sustainability outcome, sustainability is just efficiency when you include all the externalities, when you include the carbon, when you include the particulate matter, the criteria pollutants, when you include the waste, when you include the social and economic consequences, good and bad, of
and that brings back
to
the discussion about value. Sorry, it just really makes sense to the other part we just talked about, the value.
Yeah.
Once you talk about efficiency. And that's actually easier to explain to a boardroom.
I think so. That to me the headline is actually pretty simple. It's sustainability or emissions. To just take emissions, for example, that equals consumption. Consumption equals cost. And so would that be the transitive property? Emissions go down, costs go down.
Right.
And so you don't, even in today's environment, for example, in the US, where we're really struggling with the language that we use around doing the right thing for the climate, doing the right thing for the environment, we can think of this as we're reducing emissions, but we can also think of it as we're reducing costs. Those are ultimately the same thing. So, but again, it goes back to value. How do you've got to put a value on those externalities. You've got to put a value on the nitrous oxide and the particulate matter and the plastic waste generation and so forth and so on, those costs that you're creating in doing your business. But ultimately, I really feel like sustainability and efficiency are two ways of saying the same thing. It's just that you have to define efficiency, pardon me. You have to define efficiency in a more expansive way.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And again, I think this is kind of within what we talk about, the kind of the chain of value and where we are with efficiency is led in many cases by sustainability, and they not interchangeable, but definitely work with one another. And as I said, I think giving the case you presented to boardrooms is easier than talking about sustainability as a standalone practice.
Yeah. And, going back to your question,
Yeah.
the reporting is absolutely essential. We can't do anything without the reporting, but the reporting is really, at least the American idiom is table stakes. That's what you have to, that just gets you to the table. That doesn't actually create any value in and of itself other than getting you to the table. You then have to, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
No,
and sufficiency is really finding a way that you can talk about these things within your organization in a way that drives both the climate and environmental outcomes as well as the profit and loss outcomes, and then taking that reporting as a basis for creating win-wins for sustainability and for cost. So there's a lot. And again, it comes back to a big mindset shift, I think, within organizations to see this not as a drag on their business, but as a turbocharger for their business.
That as a turbocharger for the business, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree, the reporting for itself is a means. It's not the end target. And
yeah.
And once you deal with the reporting, it means you have the right data, and then you can actually set objectives. And then we talk back about value and efficiency and the things we talked about. That actually really kind of builds the puzzle for me. Makes a lot of sense to that part. And we talked about technology and innovation, so that actually leads to my next question, which is, in your work, how do you see innovation, including AI, which I think is started to be part of everything, whether you're really using agentic AI or just using prompts at your work, or it writes your email for you. But in general, how do you see innovation, automation, and data accelerating the energy transition while meeting regulations?
Yeah, to me, it's we live in the most exciting time in human history.
Okay.
And from a technology standpoint, I feel like
Right.
our grandchildren are going to be jealous that we get to live with all its troubles, that we get to live now, and they get to read about it in the history books.
Right.
The thing that I've really focused on is the nexus between power and AI and climate. So kind of a triangular nexus between power, AI, and climate. AI, for example, drives grid expansion and modernization to feed the AI, to run the AI for its own uses. But it also goes back the other way. It goes back the other way in that the grid will increasingly rely on AI to optimize its costs and its emissions as it serves that incremental load. And so I see, frankly, when you asked about regulations, I see the regulators really struggling to keep up with the advances in technology. For example, if we get to a point where we can have generative AI helping run our power grids, generative AI being a non-deterministic tool, how do you regulate that? Especially if it's making decisions in microseconds. How do you regulate that? How do you get yourself comfortable even in the first place with a pilot project as a regulator? There's an old joke that utilities are a decade behind the private sector and regulators are a decade behind the utilities. And
I've heard that.
That isn't true. That it isn't really true anymore, but it's indicative of the fact that just by nature, the regulators are always playing catch up. They're always playing catch up. And now that the utility world and the private sector world are increasingly becoming one, and that's the power AI nexus, that need to have sophisticated and properly mandated regulators becomes ever more crucial to keeping the whole system going. The system is only as strong as its weakest link. And right now, I think the regulators, and I feel for them, they've probably got the toughest job in this whole nexus. And so how we meet, we accelerate, you accelerate at the speed of the slowest component. And my concern is that unless we really focus on resourcing and empowering the regulators, we're going to have a really tough time making not just evolutionary improvements, but the kind of revolutionary improvements that we need on both the power and the AI and the climate side.
That makes a lot of sense. As in 7E, we do a lot with compliance and regulatory posture and helping on one hand mitigate or explain or meet regulations for enterprises. On the other hand, we deal also with one thing that makes me optimistic, although not everything is still in place, but there's a lot of discussions by both regulators domestically and internationally, obviously in the EU, about AI governance, which needs to meet. And it's interesting and regulators are trying to keep up at the same pace, but it's crazy because the advances in technology are moving at amazing paces. On the other hand, we do have moral questions, we have operational questions, and these things need to be in place. You want it to be, as we said before, as efficient as possible to make it more sustainable. You had a foot in both the academic and business worlds. Universities like Stanford can experiment and move differently than corporations. From your experience, what lessons should business leaders borrow from the academia, and what should universities be learning from the private sector?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that I am right in the heart of. So I love this question. I think you got to, as you said, there are two vectors. There's the academia to business vector. There's the business to academia vector. From the academic side, I would advise business to do what we have done here at Stanford in terms of using our campus infrastructure, our campus utilities and infrastructure as a living lab for sustainability innovation. We are very fortunate that we are actually our own city, Stanford, California. So we have, a tremendous amount of autonomy within our campus. We also have vertically integrated energy, water, and waste utilities that my group operates. And so a tremendous amount of infrastructure and a tremendous amount of data coming out of that infrastructure, and the ability to really be hands-on with it. I mean, it's here. Our thermal plant is here. Our water systems are here. And we've created a lot of different mechanisms to bring academia into our world of operations and investment and find opportunities for academia, especially both students and undergrads, graduate students, and professors, to find opportunities to help us solve real world sustainability innovation challenges within our system. And we've been, I'll talk about energy as an example. We have a first of its kind at scale thermal plant that heats and cools the campus. And we have a bunch of interns, a bunch of living lab fellows who are helping us out, a bunch of researchers who are using the system both as an example of what can be done, but also an opportunity to find ways to optimize. And so we have found ways all across the value chain, working with our academic partners. We get a lot out of it because our system becomes more efficient. Our customers become happier. They get a lot out of it because they've got a living, breathing system spewing out data that they can do, research projects and academic papers and what have you, or even spin out startups around. So that would be my advice from academia, is to think of your systems in a different way. Think of them as a living lab for innovation. But from the private sector back to academia, I would really encourage academia to see and encourage not research as the end goal, but commercialization as the end goal of what you're doing. And Stanford, I'll put in a plug for Stanford here. Stanford is really, really good at that. It's a very entrepreneurial campus. It's a very entrepreneurial institution. And so the idea of a student or a researcher having a side gig as CEO of a startup based on research that they've done is absolutely commonplace here. Now, most universities are more cautious about that, but Stanford is actually quite aggressive about getting technology commercialized and out into the marketplace, whether it's a license or a royalties or ownership or what have you. So I would really encourage the academic side to learn from the private sector in terms of commercialization and really making that, again, making the ideal outcome a commercial outcome, not just a research outcome, not just an academic paper. I think there are just tremendous opportunities, whether it's a PhD thesis or postdoc work or a bright idea that an undergrad has. There is so much opportunity, so many great ideas and great discoveries that aren't being commercialized, that could be. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for academia.
Amazing. I think it's an opportunity for both sides. As you said, it could be students or researchers. And in sustainability, we need the innovation. It's complex fields, and having the right people go both ways and helping business on the commercialization side and enjoying the knowledge and the know-how from the academia and vice versa makes a lot of sense. I know these programs in other universities, but it's great to hear about more happening on the Stanford campus. Moving on, one thing that I find inspiring based on our early chat is that you don't just talk about policy or theory, you've been in the trenches, let's call it, of energy and sustainability work. For our listeners, can you share a project or initiative you're most proud of, or something from these projects our listeners can take away?
Yeah, so I'll use one of these academic operations collaborations that I've been talking about. We have about 700 buildings on our campus, depending on how you count them, but hundreds and hundreds of buildings. And most of those buildings are heated and cooled by our central energy facility, which is a thermal plant that turns renewable electricity into hot water and chilled water. Then we have closed loop systems that go out and go up into the buildings and heat and cool. So we have a really interesting thermal energy arrangement. But when you get into the buildings, you run into a lot of problems that the HVAC world has been dealing with and trying to solve for a long time. And that is, if you have an air handler going across 3 offices, the first office is going to be too cold, the middle office is going to be just right, and the last office is going to be too hot. And how do you optimize for user experience so that everybody, all 3 offices get the right thermal outcome, the right level of comfort, but also play that back through the value chain back to the thermal energy plant and optimize the output of the thermal energy plant by being really effective in forecasting those loads, not just divvying up the air, but in forecasting those loads. And we've had a couple of PhDs at this point, because they eventually go into other things, but we have this iterative process of work that we call it the Cooler project is the thermal energy forecasting. The Seeker project is the one where we're trying to deal with individual air handlers, individual spaces. But we're learning a ton about how the system works, how thermal mass actually moves in these buildings. And what's so spectacular about it is that we're already dealing with energy that's created that is created out of renewable electricity. But we're finding opportunities to use our generation capacity, our thermal energy generation capacity, so much more efficiently. If we can accurately forecast, for example, what our buildings are going to need, thermal inertia takes a while. It takes a while to get through the system. So if we can forecast that better, then we can operate our energy plant better, more efficiently, less energy, less cost. But also in that efficiency is the ability to use the same physical infrastructure to do more. In other words, if we use it more efficiently by doing great forecasting and knowing exactly what we need to produce instead of guessing at it, we can actually run that plant more efficiently and thus reach the limits of that plant years later than we would otherwise. So it's an opportunity to take the existing infrastructure and stretch it over a longer period of time.
That really impacts the infrastructure, not just the immediate savings on energy, but then on infrastructure. That's huge investments over the years.
Yeah, huge capital investments amortized over decades. But if we can stretch that, if we can put off the time to expand it, even by a couple of years, the economic value is huge.
That's mind-blowing.
And of course, the additional embedded carbon in the facility is deferred another couple of years, and it's a win for everybody. So I'm really proud of that project, and I'm especially proud that it's a lot of research that just could have gone on the shelf somewhere, but we are making it real in our system and showing, and not only optimizing for Stanford, but providing an exemplar for the rest of the world. And that's the most Stanford thing I can think of, is optimizing for us and providing an exemplar for the rest of the world. That's why we're here.
Right. I think that's a big role that academia needs to take, or is taking in some cases, sharing the knowledge and leading the way with having the time and the resources for research and experiments and using that for, as you said, for commercialization at a later stage. Moving from Stanford to a bit of a more international view. According to a recent study by Amber, a research group shows China is the clean energy engine for countries stepping away from fossil fuels by hypergrowth in solar panel and wind turbines production, driving prices down, and increasing adoption in other markets such as Africa, Latin America, and Asia. How do you see this impacting the energy market in the US?
Oh boy, huge and multifaceted. And it's been going on for about 15 years now.
Yeah.
China really ramped up solar production and wind turbine production about 15 years ago, maybe a little earlier. And all of a sudden, the price of building a plant plummeted. Now, frankly, I don't know how the Chinese made any money on this, but all of a sudden a really competitive solar PPA, power purchase agreement, went from $95 per megawatt per megawatt hour
Yeah.
to down to like $30 in the matter of a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then we went from fixed panels to single axis tracking, and the prices barely moved, even though regardless of that additional expense. And then we add batteries behind the meter at solar and wind farms. Again, the prices of the PPAs barely move. Now, things have come up a bit recently. We've had the tariff issues and all that, but they've had an absolutely massive impact, creating in the US an opportunity to buy electricity at a much, much, much less expensive rate, in a rate that on a cost basis is equivalent or even better than a natural gas-fired generation or coal-fired generation. So just a seismic shift in the marketplace as a result of this massive growth in production.
Right.
But I think the other part of it too, when we were doing solar projects and wind projects 20 years ago, it was very much a construction project. It was finding a site, ordering a lot of components, building, basically customizing everything.
Yeah.
Now so the costs were relatively high. Now, I think what China has really driven the market to do is to standardize and create and make projects more of a manufacturing exercise than a construction exercise. And this, by doing more at the factory, the costs in the field at the site come down precipitously. And so I think that's, and of course, standardization is what you need to create the conditions for that manufacturing model instead of the construction model. So right. I think, obviously huge impact on energy pricing, but also, and less talked about, but also a perhaps even more important shift from a construction mindset to a manufacturing and installation mindset, and which you're now seeing actually with small modular nuclear reactors, where the folks developing the SMRs they're going with a manufacturing first model, not the old construction model of bringing everything to the site and putting it all together there, tremendously expensive. SMRs, a big part of their value proposition is their manufacturing model. So I think I feel very safe saying that China changed the world when they went through that period of hypergrowth in solar and wind production.
Wow. And as you said, moving from construction to manufacturing, I think also changes not only the costs, but also change the timelines for execution,
tremendously.
Which is
boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
Mind-blowing. Great. We are getting close, Lincoln, to them, but not yet. And what I find interesting is a lot of people in our space, in the sustainability and environmental space, people are positive and eternal optimists, I would say. And this podcast has shown it from the previous people who spoke before you here. And I would like to ask you, before we wrap up, what drivers you see as key in the future for sustainability?
To me, there are really two.
Okay.
It's this. Maybe I'll say three.
Okay.
The first one being the shift in mentality from cost to value that we've talked about.
Yeah.
The second being recognizing behavior change management as an essential element, together with technology, that actually moves the needle. Technology alone does not move the needle. We need the humans to play along too.
Yeah.
And then finally, the shift from construction to manufacturing, which
Right.
is really changing the energy world in ways that are perhaps subtle and not fully realized yet. But I really see that going forward as a seismic, use the word seismic again, as a seismic shift, as a sea change in how we do things and how much they cost.
Well, that is inspiring. And we did walk through all of that. So, Lincoln, thank you so much for being also practical and inspiring at the same time. And I think kind of as someone who's ruled both worlds or triple worlds from startups to academia to the private sector, I loved your perspective. It really shows the sustainability is more than a side project. It's really strategy, value, and as you said, and I think more people following this will look at also the grid and energy, and not just, as we said, not just the shiny parts of sustainability. Although we all like shiny things, which is not a bad thing. If they are also sustainable, then that's fine. I would like to say, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I want to add one more element to that last question, which is a great question. And I think going back to your question, the question about reporting, and I think the world is, a lot of companies are there already. Some companies are there already, but I think the shift from a compliance-driven sustainability effort to a strategic sustainability effort. And so many companies they talk about strategy, but they're really stuck in compliance. And again, being sustainability going from a drag on earnings to a turbocharger on earnings, the shift from compliance sustainability to strategic sustainability is absolutely vital. And I hope we're going to see more of it going forward.
I completely agree. And we talk about motivation, drivers. I am looking at the next generation going into sustainability. Some seriously talented people, which we need them more than the burden of compliance, but more about their scratching their heads and getting that innovation out and bringing value. So I'll just add to that. But hopefully we can both agree that in sustainability you need all the optimism and positive thinking as possible. I think that's a big driver. Again, thanks, Lincoln, for joining us. This was very, as I said, inspiring, and I love your perspective. If anyone in our audience has any question for Lincoln, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to Inside ESG on YouTube or Spotify, and for more conversations with people shaping the future of sustainability. Until next time, I'm Doron, and this was Inside ESG. Lincoln, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great.